Incorporated into rabbinic teachings.
Okay, so that's going to be my opening line. So let's start with this. So this week on Wednesday, I think Wednesday or Thursday, is the 5th anniversary on the Hebrew calendar of the passing of Jeff Krause. Jeff was a young man that started coming to Chabad in 2015. And unbeknownst to us, he was in recovery. And he, one Saturday, November, I guess it was November of 2018, didn't show up to services. And about an hour and a half into the service, somebody came and told us that they had found him, that he had relapsed, overdosed, and had passed away. Long story short, I knew his parents well. They live in Buffalo, New York. Connected with them. Funeral took place, and what was really jarring for us was that there was an entire community of people in recovery. That Jeff was both a sponsor and a sponsee, and at the funeral and then at a memorial service that evening, there was 150 people from the recovery community, and it was like, how did this happen? Here's a guy who's in recovery, and we didn't know about it. He was going through a little bit of a hard time. He had some dental work and was in a lot of pain, and what I imagine, because I can't ask him the question, what I imagine is that the stigma around addiction was so strong that he had found this new community, and he just wanted that to be his safe space. And he did his work in recovery, but this community was like the safe community. And so together with his parents, we launched Jeff's Place, which is dedicated to helping break down stigma. But what's so fascinating is something that his mother told me. I mentioned this yesterday. We had a little at the meal after the services yesterday. I shared this, that she said that when Jeff was 14, he passed away at 30. When he was 14, she said she felt like an alien spaceship came in and took their son away. And he was in and out of all kinds of difficult situations and recovery and treatment until he turned 27. He came to a program here in Atlanta called MAR. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. And one of the requirements they have is that every week you have to go to a house of worship. They don't care which house of worship, what faith, but you have to go to a house of worship. As we'll see, the 12 steps are deeply rooted in a spiritual practice. If you watched Rabbi Taub's talk, it's not his novelty. It's the premise of Carl Jung's whole perspective that he fed, so to speak, to introduce the whole concept of the 12 steps. And all of the AA is built on that premise that if one has a spiritual experience, that is the so to speak, the kickoff to get you into recovery. But what she said was that when Jeff came to Chabad, which is deeply rooted in spiritual teachings, that they got their son back. Mm-hmm. And for the last 3 years of his life, they felt that kid who left at 14, they got him back. Mm. And what the messaging for me in that is that these teachings are aligned with the foundation of recovery. Now, I've always been open to people in recovery, and I've always found people in recovery to be really heroes. I know that people in recovery don't like to think of themselves that way because that feeds the ego. But at the same time, I have a lot of respect for that. But I didn't really invest myself in the understanding of recovery, and specifically in the method of 12 steps, until after Jeff passed away. And then subsequently, I've studied with a group of friends, people in recovery. We studied the big book, and we've gone through the 12 and 12. Mm-hmm. I've taught classes on the 12 steps, and of course we host meetings here, and I've sat on panels with other faith leaders. I was recruited to the Clinton Foundation's task force, interfaith task force on the opioid crisis. So that's how I got into this, and what I have found most importantly is that these teachings they're really universal spiritual teachings. But there's always been a notion, especially in the Jewish world, that the 12 steps are Christian. And while they may have been introduced by individuals who are deeply Christian, there's nothing Christian about them. And in fact, my objective today is to actually line up the 12 steps with core teachings from Judaism, illuminated from the teachings of Chabad philosophy, but fundamentally they're spiritual teachings. So that's my objective today. Any questions or comments? Does that answer your question?
It answers it how you got involved, but I'm just curious, what was the rabbi,
Rabbi Taub.
how did he, same way?
I don't know. One could speculate. He's never admitted, but one could speculate that he himself is in recovery. He
talks about third person. I noticed he doesn't
Yeah.
talk about it like me. Yeah.
Well, I guess
I wondered the same thing.
I guess my overriding question is this pervasive amongst Chabad rabbis?
No, this is so he's a leader definitely in the recovery world. Maybe I've become a little leader, but my goal is that my brother has a son who's now I think he just celebrated his 2nd year of sobriety. And so my brother has opened up they've created their own kind of program outside of Boston where they live called Jewish Anonymous something. I don't forget what it stands for, but so the world has, for all of the craziness of the world, right? It's given birth to a lot of wonderful things, right? The openness of society has, growing up, they said you have to be open-minded, but not so open-minded that your brain falls out, right? So there's a lot of open-mindedness that's a little bit, it seems like people's brains have fallen out. But in that process, a lot of good has happened. And one of the things that has happened is that people have stopped running away from looking at the stigma that exists in our communities around all kinds of different things. Addiction being one of them. Are we out of the woods yet? Absolutely not. I was at a funeral on Friday, and not one word was mentioned about the fact that the 35-year-old man who died of an overdose. It was really disappointing to me. They spoke wonderfully about him and his life and so on. There was a vague reference, but it was just disappointing. There were 150 people there. I would never have done a funeral. I mean, unless the family specifically asked not to, but it's not even an open secret. It's just everybody knew, that this fellow struggled. So let's get out in front of it and talk about it. I was at a funeral in the summer of a young man who died from mental health. He committed suicide, but from a mental health situation. And it was open topic there. It was actually an Orthodox rabbi that performed the service. So I think there's a need for us to talk about it. But what we're really looking to talk about, as was really outlined in Rabbi Taub's talk, is that we all humans have this struggle, right? That if this is a spiritual malady, the by virtue of being born, by being embodied, right? We all have this struggle. The difference is that the addict is more so, right? That's the nature of things. The addict is more so, right? We all, yeah, thank you. I closed it because there was some noise out there. Thank you. What it is at its core. So let me explain what it is at its core, and then we'll get into the actual content. Welcome. So at its core, each of us, whether you're in recovery or not, I think we can each identify that there's a part of us that is driven to living a life of purpose and a life of meaning, right? And very few people wake up in the morning and say, I want to do absolutely nothing of any value today, right? People who do that are probably very depressed, suffer from depression, because that's really a really dark place to live, where you don't want to do anything of any value. Most people live, they want to make meaning in the world. They want to marry, they want to have children, which is an act of meaning. You want to give of yourself to another. You want to volunteer for organizations that do good in the world. You want to give of your time and of your money to causes that are meaningful. And, at some level, everybody tries to contribute to the world and tries to better themselves. If you're exercising, right? If you're trying to eat healthy, if you're watching your weight, even if there's some selfishness in there, there's still this value of like, I want things to be different. I want things to be better than they are, right? That's just the nature of things. But then we have another part of us that is called me. I like to feel good. I like to look good. I want to have a lot of money because I want to buy things that make me happy and make me feel good. And I want me time and leave me alone. And, I like to go on vacations, and I like to have, that's all the other side of us, which is preoccupied with self. And every human being experiences that. Now, the reality of life is that we swing back and forth, right? This idea, people try to create balance in their life, and people attempt to create balance by figuring out exactly how many hours they're going to work, how many hours they're going to play, how many hours they're going to sleep, how many hours. It doesn't work that way. There's no magic formula for creating balance in your life. Balance comes from recognizing this inner mechanism. And when you become too preoccupied with self, create whatever parallel that is, work, exercise, obsession with what you're eating, whatever it is, when you become too preoccupied with the self, you become unhappy. So then you move the pendulum to the other side, which is all about the higher purpose, giving of yourself, and so on. And we'll do that for a long period of time until We'll do that for a long period of time until that also becomes unsatisfying. And the reason why that becomes unsatisfying is because we're not meant to live in this altruistic place. We're not meant to live in an idealistic place. That's heaven. And we weren't put on heaven, we were put on earth. And we have this built-in tension. So we have to, once we are overly invested there, we come back. We pull back, right? Let's make this really practical. If you're a workaholic, but let's not use the holic part. If you work a lot, right? You're engaged in a very serious business endeavor, and you're working, and your spouse and children are being neglected. You're going to hear about it at some point. And if you choose to ignore it, you're going to end up alone, and children who don't really care very much for you and are not going to be very well-developed human beings. So at some point you say, I really got to cut back on work. So you start investing. I'm going to take my family on a vacation. We're going to go spend some time together. And we go and do that, but you can't stay on vacation either, right? We're going to go on vacation. My wife and I went on this summer. All of our kids were out at camp or married or doing whatever they do. And we had like this window of 3 weeks without children. So we went to England and Scotland for like 10 days, and we had a great time. But at the end of the 10 days, we said, this was good, just the right amount of time. We can't do this anymore, right? That's it. I mean, thankfully, it wasn't the two of us that couldn't do this anymore. Like, we really enjoyed each other's company, but it was like, that's it. Like, we have to get back to life. There's only so much, this is great, but that's just not where life is lived. So you move back, and then you sometimes just naturally pull more towards the work again, and then let's take exercise, right? Exercise is really important. It's good for the body and eating well. But what happens when you become so obsessed with the exercise and so obsessed with what you're eating that you become distracted from other things, and you actually begin to harm your body when you exercise too much? So we all live in this tension. That's the nature of being embodied, right? Soul and body. The soul wants to go up, the body wants to go down. King Solomon says the spirit of man is to go up, the spirit of the animal is to go down. In Hasidic philosophy, we talk about the body being the animal. It's all instinctual, it's all driven. That's true about the physical body, it's true about instinct, it's true about emotion. It's even true to some extent about our intellect. It's got a certain personality, and it's driven downward. The soul pulls us upward, and we live in this tension. The fact that a soul and a body can coexist is miraculous, because they're both pulling in different directions. But in a healthy person who doesn't struggle with the disease of addiction, we navigate that, and we're frustrated in that journey, right? Life has pain. That's just the way it is. The addict can't come to themselves. Just simple as that. When the addict is struggling with this tension, and it's deep, it's very, very deep. It's a very deep tension that doesn't manifest itself necessarily in rational thinking, or necessarily not in rational thinking. It's just, there's this inner tension that's so profound that the exercise doesn't do it, the eating healthy doesn't do it, the work doesn't do it. You know, maybe it's a temporary fix, but it's not, the inner discomfort is so great that the tension, which is essentially the soul pulling so strong and the body pulling so strong in these opposite directions, that there's just this inherent discomfort. I'll use an example that for me is very, very real right now, is what's going, the massacre that took place in Israel on October 7th. I've been very careful not to look at any videos or pictures of what went on there, because I know that I won't be able to come to myself. Even without it, I find myself thinking about it and thinking about the loved ones of those people, and I just begin to fall apart. And what do I do when I begin to fall apart? I redirect my thinking somewhere else, because the pain of being in that space is too great. And I've thought about it, and I said, I'm going to try to stay in that pain, not going to run from the pain. And I can do that for a little bit, but I can't do that for too long, because it's just too painful, right? So imagine being perpetually in that state of discomfort where you have this tension pulling, and you can't come to a place of ease within yourself, which is why they call it disease. It's a dis-ease. And some of you may be in recovery. I've heard many people in recovery speak that when they had that first drink or that first drug, whoa, suddenly that pain was gone. For a moment, or for more than a moment, for however long they were under the influence of it, they came to themselves. And, my wife and I have this ongoing debate whether, when you have a headache, should you take a pill, should you not take a pill? Like, should you move out of the pain or not? Like, she calls me a pill popper. I do suffer from headaches, and also a pill pusher, because like when my kids are not feeling good, like, here, which drug can I give you, right? So, but it's actually been very profound journey for myself to come to realize that, again, I'm not specifically in recovery, but that I do try to run away from the pain. So I actually, when I was a certain period of time, the culture is slowly beginning to shift, but in the Chabad culture, alcohol is part of the culture. It's part of our spiritual service. You get together with a rabbi, everybody says a little l'chaim, and they sing some songs, there's words of inspiration, and it's supposed to be moderated. But at a certain period in my teenage years, I didn't moderate it, and I drank to blackout many, many times. My body doesn't like alcohol. I don't drink at all now. Because when I even drink a glass of wine, I get a terrible headache, like a migraine that lasts for 3 or 4 days. So, who knows? If I didn't have that pain, maybe I would be an alcoholic. I don't know. Or maybe the tension is not as great inside myself as I think it is, because a lot of people do get headaches after they drink, and they're alcoholics and they drink anyway, right? And they suffer the consequences. So who knows what my story is, but if we can, what I'm trying to do before we jump into the steps is to really convey that when we say that addiction is a spiritual malady, that's what it is. It's this inherent tension that exists amongst all humans, but the addict doesn't have the ability to reconcile that. And that's what Carl Jung was saying, is that when you have a spiritual experience, something that moves you out of your limitation of your body and gives you a glimpse that you could have that resolution of that tension in this relationship with a higher power, that again, you're gonna go back to the discomfort because we can't stay in that place all the time. But through working the steps and working the program and being in an environment of other people and engaging in this kind of surrender, right? That helps resolve that tension, even if it's just for a short time. But then you know that there's a place to go back over and over again to release that tension, to release the dis-ease, and to find an anchoring. So that's my intro. Any comments or thoughts on that anybody wants to share?
That was great.
Thank you.
Yeah. What was that last thing you said? Spirituality and addiction, the body and soul.
So the spiritual, that addiction is a spiritual malady, right? Which is essentially this tension between body and soul. And as Carl Jung said, that when one has this profound spiritual experience, that's when we kind of get a glimpse of what can ease be. Like, how can I be at ease with myself without needing to get there through a substance, through a behavior? Which, by the way, granted, a lot of exercise is a better way of releasing the dis-ease than using heroin. That's a given, right? Even though it could be very damaging, but nobody should run to something as the means of escaping the disease. We should exercise because it's good for us, and it does help release tension. And we should eat because our body needs the nurture, and we should engage in meaningful relationships because that gives us purpose and meaning. So not all of those behaviors are means of escape, even if they could be used as a means of escape. And really, it's the intention that will draw the distinction whether the behavior is being used as an escape or if the behavior is used to nurture either the soul or the body, which both need nurture in a healthy balance. I want to just make a comment, just parenthetically, about the question was asked whether Rabbi Tal was in recovery. So I thought about this, that when people ask me if I'm in recovery, that I'm going to say I'm not going to tell you. Why? Because I think, and maybe he is, maybe he isn't, but the fact that he doesn't answer the question, I think, is actually very powerful for the one that's asking the question, because we want to box people in recovery into a certain box. We want to say they belong to a certain something, a certain class, a certain race, a certain life circumstance. And the messaging of recovery, as we're going to try to outline in the short time we have, is universal messaging. It's true for the addict and it's true for the non-addict. These steps are just a way of life. In the intro to the 12 and 12, he says that more people are adopting this as a way of life, right? It states there clearly that it's not, people embrace this as a way of life that's not necessarily only for those who are struggling with addiction. And, and my hope is that you have a lot of wonderful spiritual paths out there, but people like to have things codified. It gives us structure. It gives us a roadmap on how to live our lives. And I think the 12 steps does that, whether you're in recovery or not.
When we talk about the spiritual experience, that can really show us where we're all trying to, I guess, go. And then you're pulled into the reality. And so the truth is we're trying to get back to that spiritual experience. Are you saying that when people do have a drink, that will bring them to that place? Or are you saying something else?
I'm saying that, no, I'm not saying that at all. What the drink does is it resolves the tension, the inner tension, not by providing a spiritual experience, but just by resolving the tension.
Yeah.
Because it's self-understood, all the inhibitions, all the outer structure is diminished, right? It's what you are doing is what all drugs and alcohol and and unhealthy behaviors do is it allows for one to temporarily forget about the barriers, the things that block the soul from experiencing. So we had a gentleman who spoke at one of our Quieting the Silence events here, who talked about that he has social anxiety and he just could never come to himself in an environment. And he was at a party and he had a drink, and then suddenly he discovered that he's like, he can talk to anybody, right? So his barrier was his perception, his body's discomfort with being around other people. So can we say that was a spiritual experience? I mean, I guess you can say that, but we're not talking about that kind of. When he had the alcohol, his body just kind of disappeared. There's actually there's a positive analogy around alcohol, right? Because it's also important to say that ever since the sin of Adam and Eve, there's nothing entirely good in the world and nothing entirely bad. So alcohol is not bad. Heroin is not bad. There are many good uses of these things. And I wouldn't say if you don't struggle with heroin, you should just have a hit. I'm not suggesting that. But heroin is used in other contexts that are, they're used in medications. It's used in people who are out on the battlefield to help them, temporarily hold the pain and so on. And alcohol, if there's nothing wrong with a glass of wine, unless you're an alcoholic, right? There might be a problem with 10 glasses of wine, even if you're not an alcoholic, but one glass of wine, that's great. There's nothing wrong with it. There are some schools of thought that are anti that stuff, but I don't believe that. I believe that everything that God created has a good and a bad. A knife is a great thing. It can cut your bread. It could also kill someone. What are you going to use it for, right? Mm-hmm. So there's an analogy that's given that a king had a son, and the son was destined to become the next king. But the king wanted to test the son to see if he was royalty, if he could really have the moral character to withstand the challenges and to be a worthwhile king. So he sends him out. He says, go away from home. I'm sending you out there, and come back in 2 years. So he goes out and he falls in with a bad group of guys. And in short order, he looks nothing like royalty. And a couple of years go by and he's too embarrassed to go back to the palace. So the king, and that's, he was just disappointed with himself, and he's living his life with his bum friends. Mm-hmm. One day he gets a letter from the king. And the king says, listen, my dear son, I know that you have ventured away from home, and that you've fallen in with bad people, but you're still my son, and I want to invite you back to the palace. You can imagine the prince is like overwhelmed with gratitude and appreciation for his father, and he wants to celebrate, right? But who do you celebrate with? All these bums? They have no clue about royalty. They don't even understand what's going on here. But that's who his friends are. So he invites everybody to the pub, and he says, first round of drinks on me. Everybody has a drink. And he says, second round of drinks on me. And before long, everybody's drunk. When everybody's drunk, he gets up and he says, I want to tell you all that I am the prince. Yeah, that's great. Mm-hmm. He says, and my father sent me out into the world to see if I could, yeah. And I failed. Yeah, everybody's cheering, is great. They're all so drunk. And he says, and my father's invited me back to the palace, and everybody's. So what's happened here? The body is the bums in the pub. The soul is the prince. Mm-hmm. When the soul comes down into the world, it comes down into this environment, and it gets lost, right? It gets lost in the body's needs. But the soul never forgets. The prince never forgets that he's a prince, and he just is too embarrassed. He feels too much shame about how far he's gone, that he's not going to go back to the palace until one day the king invites him back. In other words, the soul says, I know who I am, and I want to reconnect, but I got this body. I got all these bums. They have no clue what I'm talking about. They don't. The body doesn't know. If you leave yourself to your body, you're going to be an indulgent, narcissistic creature. That's just the way it is, because that's what the body's an animal. It just wants and wants and wants. It just wants to feel good and wants to serve itself, and that's what it's going to do. So the analogy in the context of alcohol is we drink in order to quiet the body so that we can experience the soul. Mm. Right? And that's what happens. So when there's a healthy context, right? When there's a healthy context, then then it's okay to have a drink or two, because you actually, and this, the story is told in the context of these Hasidic gatherings where we sit together and we have a rabbi, we sing songs that open us up. You say a little, have a shot or two, which kind of loosens the body up, and then you become open, and very powerful things can happen in that environment. But if the alcohol is damaging to you, then you're not getting there. You're just furthering the damage.
So is the philosophy of the 12 steps really like how you get to that spiritual experience without the use of something as the form?
Yes, and
Uh-huh.
because oftentimes the spiritual experience is actually what starts the process.
Yeah.
Now, not everybody has a spiritual experience before they're willing to start the process. And that's the oft cited saying in the rooms, it works if you work it, right? It means there's a program here, there's a structure here. Follow the structure and it will work for you. Does that mean you're going to have this profound spiritual experience? Either yes or no. But a lot of people have a spiritual experience that moves them into that space. And that's what is called, this is where, scripture, Jewish scripture has been hijacked a little bit by the culture. There's a phrase, one has received God's grace, right? That sounds very Christian, but it actually comes from the prophets. The exact words come from the prophets. The idea is that why one person is able to have that experience and move into recovery is a gift. And it's a very important perspective because it keeps you away from judgment of others. And it also keeps you in a state of gratitude. Why was I fortunate to have that spiritual experience that moved me into the space of recovery? It's a gift. And when you're in that space of recovery, every single day is a recognition that I'm living a healthier life. I'm living truly a real balanced life. And that's a gift. So that's a grace that one has. I don't want to venture into this right now, but there's a lot of talk around psychedelics being a major tool to help people get into recovery. And I'm not going to analyze whether I don't know enough about it I don't know enough about the perspective of that as being a means to recovery. But I think the point of that, though, is that in the psychedelic experience, you have a spiritual experience. And when you have that spiritual experience, it kind of says, oh, wow, like there's a different dimension to all of existence. And that can be an impetus, according to those that are of that philosophy, to help move people into that space.
I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole, but I got one more thing.
Go ahead.
So the spiritual experience, because usually a spiritual experience, well, not usually, I guess, I was gonna say, it comes when things are really difficult. Like, there's something happens, and then that thing opens up.
Or
the
opposite extreme also.
Or you're at such a high.
You have such blessing in your life where you can no longer ignore the fact that this is coming from somewhere else.
One or the other.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. I see.
Is it okay if I chime in?
Sure, please.
Just from my own experience. So I think so addicts and alcoholics, we love to change the way that we feel. And I think that something that can get confusing in recovery is wanting a spiritual experience to be a feeling. Kind of like with marriage. Marriage is, love is not always a passionate feeling. It's sometimes it's, we know that, right? But so with spirituality, it's like we're seeking, that's why sometimes people will get caught up in a real charismatic church environment, but that's seeking a feeling, and that feeling, that high you get from a charismatic church environment, I guess, is not sustainable on a day-to-day basis. So I think there are spiritual experiences that happen, but then my experience has been, especially recently, I'm in my 3rd year of being sober, is that, becoming more spiritually awake and maintaining a place on a daily basis of being spiritually awake. So,
I love
because
that.
kind of.
No, that's great. That's actually
Okay.
very powerful, because what you're doing is you're drawing a distinction between feelings and something else, which is the spiritual experience.
Mhm.
It's not a feeling.
Yeah.
It may translate into feelings, but a spiritual experience is a profound, deep connection with a higher power, with God. And that's not it. Yes, we ultimately experience that as a feeling, because that's the tools that we have as human beings, but it's actually coming from a much deeper place. I really appreciate that. Well said. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I was gonna ask, how do you know when you're having a spiritual experience?
How would you answer that question?
For me, when I'm having a spiritual experience, I guess it's that well, one of the easy ways is it coincidence that this just happened, that I was just talking to somebody like about this, and then somebody else talks about this, and it's like, or is that more divine intervention, I guess, or more sort of divine things going on? So that's sort of a spiritual experience for me, almost has to be slow. Not this, because like I said, I would love it if I just like, oh my gosh, I'm in love with this church, and I'm having all these feelings all the time because I love it to me. That's, sort of, that would be my default, I think. But well, I think too, just because I am in recovery, I would say that some of the things that happened right around the time that I hit my bottom and asked for help, you can't explain it.
Yeah,
There's no explanation for why I got the grace that I got.
I would say the answer to your question is, when you have a spiritual experience, you'll know it.
Mhm.
And I think once you have that spiritual experience, then your resistance, right? So you talk about like these two things that are coincidence, or were they orchestrated, right? You'll be open to it if you've had that spiritual experience. Otherwise, you're going to be resistant to it.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say that, like, also the spiritual experience, they don't have to feel so amazing. Like, sometimes it's painful because it's like you're changing perspective and you have this new belief all of a sudden, and you're coming to that realization. And like that alone is a spiritual experience. Like, for example, say that you're obsessed with ice cream, and then one day you realize that you're very sick because of the ice cream. You're eating too much of it, and so then you're like, I see now, and I believe. It's not just logic anymore, it's a belief. I no longer
It's a shift.
Ice cream, yes.
Good. I appreciate that. That's really well said.
I think we all have spiritual experiences every day, honestly. I mean, I think, whether it's, coincidences, I mean, the smallest things, from thinking of someone and the phone rings, or,
It's the openness to it.
Yeah, the prayer of like these struggles in our lives, and then certain things show up, and even in dreams, like sometimes in dreams, or things like that. The openness. That's right.
It's the openness that starts the process. Let's do
We can go on about spiritual experiences. Totally. Yeah.
So the first time I did this class, I did it in 6 sessions. Then I did it in 3 sessions. Now we're going to do it in 1 session in 11 minutes. No, what I want to do is just touch on one idea around each of the 12 steps and just translate it down, write questions down as we go through it. And we'll go from there. So, the first step is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. There's a line in the 12 and 12. We were hoping for self-confidence as if that was the key to success. And instead we're told that it had nothing to do with self-confidence, that we were powerless over the alcohol. So the bottom line is we're looking to figure it all out. We're always looking to stay in control. And the first step in a relationship with a higher power is recognizing that you are finite and the higher power is infinite. And that is the reason why it's the first of the 12 steps, is because it really is the most difficult. You're totally letting go of your control. My analogy, which I subsequently saw in a business book, in a different, similar but different, is somebody's, I don't know how you got there, but you're hanging off on a cliff, right? And beneath you is jaggedy rocks. And if you let go, you're dead. But there's no one for miles around, and the rocks are beginning to crumble, and you're holding on for dear life. And suddenly someone says to you, look, just let go. Just let go. A lot of us have been there before. Let go, you're going to be caught. And it makes absolutely no sense to you. I'm going to let go? If you're going to hold on, you're going to die. But if you let go, you're going to be saved. But if I let go, I'm landing on the rocks there. It's totally irrational. Why? Because you believe you're in control. And if you just hold on a little longer, something's going to happen. If I just hold on a little longer, right? And this shows up in so many elements of our lives. We want to control our lives, which, again, whether you're an addict or not, this is the reality. We all want to control. We want to make sense of what's going on in the world around us. We want to feel a certain way around the world around us. We just want things to be just so. And we can't, because we're not in control. There's only one being that's in control, and that's our higher power. That's God. And so the first of the 12 steps is let go. Let go. In Chabad practice, in the spiritual practice of Chabad, you might say the program of Chabad, the beginning of the day, which is actually Jewish practice, but the beginning in the spiritual practice is to give thanks. Modeh ani. The first prayer we say as soon as we wake, even before we get out of bed, is we give thanks to God. Thanking someone is an admission. It's a surrender. You did something for me. Thank you. I'm not totally in control of my life. You contributed to my life. Wow. You helped me? Means I can't do it all for myself. First thing in the mornings, we say, thank you, God. That is an act of surrender. And that's the foundation of the day. It doesn't mean we stay there. There's a lot of work here that has to use your brain and your heart and your body, and there's a lot of stuff to do. But you got to start with letting go of that control. So that's the first step. If they wrote it that way.
Step one should be let go.
Just like that. Yeah. Good point.
There's lots of things we can do. Yeah. I'm like, what's that waiting?
Would you say that, I feel like step one requires some kind of spiritual experience to enter into that? Like, just inherent.
So like I said before, I think that's in the context of spiritual experience. Tell me your name, please.
Michelle.
I think I would really like to embrace it as Michelle is saying it. It's not necessarily like you had a divine revelation. It's this awareness that everything I've done hasn't worked, and I've tried to be in control, and it's over and over again, and it hasn't helped. And perhaps in this context, yes, if you have this moment where you feel like God spoke to you, great, all power to you. But it may be as simple as this moment of grace where you finally pick up the phone and you call that person and say, I can't do this. I need your help. So that might be the spiritual experience. Yes, it's always wonderful when something happens outside of you that gives you a kick in the butt that says, I'm going to make that phone call, right? It could be your spouse telling you, I'm moving out. That's it. And you suddenly realize, oh, shoot, I just totally messed up my life. Or your kid says to you, I don't want to have anything to do with you ever again, right? Or your dear friend is on their deathbed because of, because they overdosed or whatever, So it could be any of those things, but it's a moment. What's so powerful there is that it's a transcendent moment, because as a human being, it makes no sense. It makes no sense as a human being to let go, because below you is death. But from a rational standpoint, it also makes no sense. What you're doing is not working. It hasn't worked until now. How many times? So you say, oh, but this time it's going to work. It doesn't work. So at a certain point, because if it worked, you'd be sober. So what happens this time? Something happens in this moment, it really is a spiritual experience because it's transcendent. Spiritual means it's not tangible. There's this moment where you let go and you just give yourself over to something bigger than yourself. That act is so powerful. It's so powerful because you really step outside of yourself. Yeah, please.
My name's Neve, and I'm not wrong. Okay, yeah, so a lot of people, I guess I found, so I've been sober 10 years now, and I felt like when I first came in, I felt like I didn't have any street cred, because I didn't come in from a bunch of consequences, you know? I had a moment of clarity, like a moment of grace, and it was just, I was in the middle of an argument with the boyfriend, and I was browned out, and we were arguing, and I didn't know why, and I was ashamed that I didn't know why, and so I tried to get him to tell me, and he said, what's the point? I'll just have to tell you tomorrow anyway. And it like struck me sober, you know, and I said, because that's right. Every morning I asked about like who won the football game that we were watching yesterday. You know what I mean? Like I never knew that was a black and I said I think I'm an alcoholic, I think I need help. And I woke up the next day and I still had that thought in my mind. And I called, I was living in Richmond, Virginia, I called Richmond AA, and I said to the guy on the phone, I looked up, it was Wednesday, and I looked up meetings online, and there was one the next day, and it was Richmond YPG, and I thought it stood for Young Professionals Group. It was Young Professionals Group, and I thought that's where I belonged, you know, I was a young professional. But I said out loud, I said, there's one tomorrow, but I don't think I should wait that long. Because something in me knew one more day and I'd be able to justify this. Do you know what I mean? One more day. And oh, that was yeah, I was just overreacting. And so he's like, oh, then this woman on the phone, I got this woman on the phone, and she was like, do you want to come to my meeting? And I met her at the meeting, and I had like I wish a water main had broke. I wish a comet had hit. Do you know what I mean? Like I wasn't, and I thought I'd go in and it would be like a bunch of hobos, you know, and they'd take one look at me, this young professional, and be like, "You're not an alcoholic." I'm just saying, and so anyway, and that woman, she waited for me, and she told me that the only reason she was at inner group that the where I called that she only went for 15 minutes once a month, and so the fact that she was there when I called. Oh, the other thing was my mom got married. I thought this was cultural. Do you know what I mean? You Americans might have an issue with this.
You're good at it.
She was from Scotland. Do you know what I mean? So it just smashed that final illusion. And she was only there for 15 minutes once a month. And so it was just no, and I was like, oh, that's weird. And she's like, that's God. And I was like, okay, crazy. You know, one woman I did with this AA cult, but I ended up sticking around. And what's nuts was I was a year sober, and I was like cleaning on my computer, and I found this document called Maybe If I Sober Up. I was like, what? And it was something that I had written to myself 5 years before after a therapist told me I was an alcoholic. Wow. And I didn't know, I thought when I said it to the boyfriend, that was the first time I ever said it. Do you know what I mean? And it was me admitting it, and the way I look at it, that it's like, so God's grace was there then. Do you know what I mean? Like a window opened then.
Right.
And I didn't come through to the other side. And so it's like what you were really talking about being grateful every day, about how every single day, because I don't know, God's grace is a gift, and if I go back out there, I don't know if I'm gonna get it again. Do you know what I mean? And if I get it again, I don't know if I'm gonna walk through it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, what you were saying about the every day, that sponsor, I came in agnostic, had me build a relationship with God by she said in the morning, ask God to keep you sober that day, and at night, thank God for keeping you sober. And she said she doesn't know anyone who's done that, who's drank, and I've done it every single day for 10 years.
Wow.
And I was telling the newcomer, she was like, you know, and she said, you still do that every day? And I was like, yeah, because that's steps 1, 2, and 3 right there. Do you know what I mean? Like usually I forget at night. So in the morning, I'm like, thank you for keeping me sober yesterday. Please keep me sober today. You know, and that's like, I can't, he can, I think all that. So it's just really important for me to start.
Great, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, step 2 and 3. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, and made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. There was a great Hasidic master. He said, where can you find God? Wherever you let him in. So the reality is that the body will find all kinds of suffering rather than to accept God into ourselves, into our lives. And what I found really powerful is that we're not being told to believe. We're told to have a willingness to believe. And I think that it's an easier way to ease into it, but it's also more authentic, right? You don't know what you believe right now. You just knew that it wasn't working and you took that step to let go. What is it that you actually believe? I don't know, but I'm willing to believe. I'm not going to hold on anymore. I'm going to put aside whatever notions I have and allow for things to go where they are, where they're supposed to go. A few weeks ago, we read in the Torah the story of God appearing to Abraham, and Abraham comes to this belief that he knows that there's only one God, but God has never appeared to him. And then suddenly God comes to him, and the first thing God tells him is, go. Where should you go from? It's interesting. He doesn't tell him just where to go. He tells him where to go from. He says, leave your land, your birthplace, and your father's house. When we think about our consciousness, what makes us who we are? It's our genetics, it's our parental upbringing, and the culture in which we grew up. So the way we look at the world is completely formed by those three ingredients. We have certain inherent things that are just hardwired into us. We have the narrative that our parents kind of imposed on us. And then there's the culture, which, by the way, included in that are the choices that we made in that culture, right? We ended up in a certain place and we made good decisions and bad decisions and whatever it is. And God says to him, if you want to embrace this higher power, you got to let all of that go. If as long as you're holding on to some notion of self, you're not really open to that experience. Again, using our analogy, you're holding on to that cliff because you think somehow, you feel somehow, whatever it is, let go. It's the only way you're going to actually open yourself up. And there is in the process and in the program, there is the principle of it works if you work it, is just show up, just do what you need to do, just follow the program. And the resistance to following the program is, I'm smarter, I've got to figure it out, I know how to do it. Don't. If you want this recovery, if you want the connection, if you want a relationship with the higher power, if you want a relationship with God, you have to suspend all of that. You got to let all of that go. A nice psalm that I like is Psalm 55, verse 23, where King David says, cast your burden on the Lord and he will bear you, right? So it's like, stop carrying it, let it go. Put down your luggage, put down your baggage. God's going to handle it for you. Stop. You just got to let go. I always wish that I knew this 27 years ago when our first child was born. But, we've learned along the way what the mechanism of the human being. So a child, a 5-year-old throws a tantrum, right? They're totally irrational in that stage. And what does a parent do? They try to rationalize with the child. But calm down, but this, none of it works, right? So I remember once our twins, who our youngest, they just turned 12 on Friday. So they were probably 4 or 5 or 6, and my wife bought them new pajamas, and they were 2 different colors and different patterns. And one of them it was nighttime, they were tired, and they were completely in their animal brain, and they completely just melted, total loss. And I had just heard about this principle, of you you're not going to rationalize. And I took the child and I literally hugged the child and held the child for, I don't even know how long. They were crying hysterically, and whatever it was, 5 minutes. And then just suddenly they just let go. They let go and they stopped crying, and they just leaned into the embrace. And that's a visual of what we need to be doing with the rest of us, right? We just gotta let go, stop holding on, and just open yourself up. But in order to open yourself up, you have to really let go of all of this stuff. So we came to believe that we can actually come to a place of sanity, and we made a decision. There is a decision there to let God take care of us.
You spend another minute on, in your mind, what it means to let go.
Um,
It's something that's easy to say. Or,
I'll tell you a story. Um, do we have time? Can you guys give another 10, 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, so, my mother passed away when I was 12. And it was obviously a formative event in my life. A lot of anger, a lot of resentment. And after I married, I don't know if it was 3 or 4 or 5 years after we married, we went home to California for Passover. My father had remarried, and as young adults often do, they got their litany of resentments and complaints, and all correct, by the way. And and being a newlywed with a kid or two, everything is exacerbated because self-righteousness is there in full force. So anyway, after Passover, I sat down with my father and my stepmother, and I just unloaded all my complaints, 20 and some number of years of resentments just was vomited out. To my father's credit, he listened, didn't say a word. He listened, and then he said to me, he said, "Look," he said, "He was so mad at me." What he said, oh man, I was so angry at him. Mm-hmm. He said to me, "Look, I can apologize for the things I did wrong. I can explain the things I did right, but none of that's going to help you." He says, "When you come to accept that everything about your life was orchestrated from above, you'll begin to heal." That was not the answer I was looking for. And it took a long time for me to enter into that space. But what I can tell you is that what he said is absolutely true. As long as I was holding on, and remember, we human beings hold on because we're intellectual beings and we rationalize everything. If you ever had an argument with your wife or with your kids or with a coworker, you're so right. Why? Because your head, your mind, has a rational explanation for it. And you're always going to be stuck in yourself and in that control space when you're in your head. By the way, you can also be in your heart. You can be in your feelings. I don't care what you're telling me. This is what I feel, right? By the way, if you look at today's culture, you have such a victim mentality because this ingredient is absolutely, God is missing from the equation. And when God is missing from the equation, then you're a victim because you rationalize your victimhood, you emotionalize your victimhood, and no one's going to talk you out of it. When you're ready to let go, you stop being a victim. Because you can actually write a book about why you truly are a victim. It's true, you are a victim. But do you want to be a victim or do you want to live a life? It's a choice you make, right? We're all victims. We're victims of genetics. We're victims. I didn't, at least on a surface level, it does teach us in the teachings of Kabbalah that we actually choose our parents. But that's before we come down to this world. But that's a conversation for another time. But from a human standpoint, we're a victim. I didn't get to choose what genetics I'm going to have. I don't get to choose who my parents are. I don't get to choose what city I was born in and grew up in, right? I'm a victim. Okay, you are. Now, what do you want to do about it? Do you want to stay a victim or do you want to surrender? And if you're ready to surrender, that's a decision that you make to stop holding on. And that's why to the conversation we had before is, do I want to see these two different events that come together as coincidence, or do I want to see them as being orchestrated? It's a choice you make. A choice made easier when you start with the act of surrender and open yourself up to a relationship with a higher power, but it is a choice that you make.
So your dad saying like all that stuff was the good stuff and the bad stuff was all happened through the will of God.
Yes. And it's not why it happened, but what am I going to do about it?
Almost like accepting the truth is sometimes letting go, like. An extreme example is for me with alcohol and drugs that. I knew for a long time that I was powerless over alcohol, that as much as I wanted to be able to drink like everybody else in the cul-de-sac on Halloween. And just have 2 or 3 and be a nice little, homemaker that like, that just wasn't me, like, once I have one. Like, I want to have 10 or 20, but like. And that my life had become unmanageable, so like those were things that I knew kind of inside for a long time. I just wasn't willing to accept the truth. So that's something that I'm powerless over. Like, one of my resentments when we get to stuff work was that I am an alcoholic, that I can't just be normal like everybody else. It's like really frustrating that I can't just have a glass of wine. I love red wine, but I can't just have one glass of wine because it sets off like a trigger inside of me. It's like, oh, I want to have 10, or at least finish the bottle. But like, so that's the truth. So finally getting a moment of accepting the truth that it's something I can't control. It is the truth. Then I can, if I have a little window of grace, let it go. But like it applies, it's being in recovery applies to so many other life things. Like, I can't control the fact that my daughter, is at the age that she's at right now, and we don't have that feeling of closeness that we had whenever she was little. Like, I can't control that. So it's like being willing to realize what I can control and what I can't, and then like letting it go and finding a place of peace that, that what was the thing, like that God's going to provide everything that I need when I need it. If I just stop trying to manage everything and manage everything, and just accept the truth.
Yeah, I want to translate into my experience, because this is what you just said resonates really strongly for me. One of the things that I've come to realize for myself in the last few years is that I run away from discomfort, which is again the core identity of anybody in addiction or the human condition, but maybe I do it more than others, or maybe I don't, whatever. I don't care. I'm navigating my journey. And I think it's the same principle. It's that it doesn't feel good, but I don't have control over that. And if I'm always going to run away from the not feeling good, then I'm not really living. Feeling means you're alive. And sometimes feeling is unpleasant. That's the whole story. So it's a decision to not run away from that. But we can look at it in the squeezed kind of way, or in an expansive way. The squeezed kind of way says, well, that's what it is. That's what I got. I just got to live with it. The expansive kind of way is what my father said to me, is open yourself up. This is God's will. So if this is God's will, lean into it. Right? It's like the difference between feeling pain that you can't explain and getting a shot. You're getting an immunization shot. It doesn't feel good, but there's purpose in it, meaning in it. So you lean into it. Right? It doesn't feel good. Nobody likes to get a shot. Right? But you say, this is for my good. This is for my benefit. So I'm going to lean into that discomfort. And if you anchor it in God, you anchor it in a higher power, then it becomes filled with meaning. I'm going to share another thought, but first I'm going to tell us that this class has become unmanageable. And I'm powerless over it. So what I want to do is I want to close with this, and we'll pick it up another Sunday, not next Sunday, but maybe we can do it the Sunday after. I gave a talk at my son's bar mitzvah, my second son's bar mitzvah. So a little background on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, we don't turn on or off electricity. And we like coffee. Myself, my expanded family, everybody likes coffee. So before Shabbat, I made sure to get 2 coffee urns in my house, and everybody was invited over to the house. And it was too much power and it tripped the breakers. So we had no hot water at the house because we don't turn on. So we had hot water here. So everybody came over here, and everybody was hanging out here, and I needed to get something for my office. So this door has a security lock on it. And it's something I'd forgotten in my office, and I just totally forgot about it. And lo and behold, the door was open. So I thought that our operations guy had turned off the magnetic thing on it. So I went into my office, got the paper, and I come back out and I see that it's locked. So now I'm stuck in here. And I was supposed to be teaching a class before the services. So I'm stuck in here. So I bang on the window, somebody comes out, and I said, my father came to hear my class. I was like so proud of myself. My father's going to come and listen to my class. My father wrote that book, by the way, which is a great book for anybody who's struggling, but a great book on for people in recovery as well. Why God, why? Anyway, so this is what it was. So I sat down here and I banged on the window. And somebody came. I said, "Listen, first of all, tell my father he should teach the class." And when the security guy gets here, he's got the code. He'll come and open up for me. So I sat there, and I had some ideas for what I was going to speak about, but it kind of all came together for me in that moment. It's like, I'm not going to be angry about the situation. I can't control it. I can't. This is what it is. It's almost comedic. Like, how did I end up here? Right? I tried to do everything right, and it didn't work, and I was on time, and so I came up with this line that the answer to why is what? The answer to why God did this to me is, what am I going to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
And that became the focus of my speech. And a lot of people remember the speech because of that line, right? Most, what they say about rabbis, you can say a joke once a year. You can repeat a joke once a year. You can repeat a story twice a year, and you can repeat the messaging of the speech every week. So anyway, but people remember that speech because of that line. So the answer to why is what? Why did this happen to me? That's a victim question. If the answer is, what am I going to do about it? It stops being a victim question, and it becomes, your higher power facilitated this. There's a purpose in this. What am I going to do about it? Because that really, at the end of the day, is the only thing that we can actually control, is what am I going to do about what just happened, or about my life, or about my circumstances? What am I going to do about it? That is making a decision. That is making a decision to turn your will over to the care of God.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I ended up here, but I do know that that God is part of this equation, and therefore there's something for me to do here.
One is in the let go, like something's happening, let go. And I'm totally with you in terms of, okay, what now, what to do? And then I think to myself, well, in the let go, does something just show up? Does something just come into your life? Does, so meaning then I think of, okay, what to do? And then the what to do feels like, all right, am I trying to control the situation that's actually happening? Because you keep doing that thing and you keep getting into the mud or the quicksand, if you will. That's like the juxtaposition.
Yeah, and I think what happens is that when you like the saying that we quoted earlier from the Hasidic master Menachem Mendel of Kotsk, where is God found? Wherever you let him in.
Mm-hmm.
When you stop controlling, you suddenly find, oh, God's been here all along, right? And it doesn't mean it's always going to play out exactly as you want, because then you're back in control again, right? Oh, if it's not working out my way, well, stop controlling. It's going to work out exactly. I love this line that I heard early on in the work that I've done. It's an AA line, I believe. It's like, everything is always under control, his control, right? It's always the way it's supposed to be, because God is in control. So the question is, where am I in the equation? So if I am trying to push myself into the space, then what's happening is that every time I show up, God says, okay, you want to control the situation? Let's see how you do. And as soon as you back up, and by the way, it's not that God is actually abandoning us. It's that God's saying, we'll keep the facade on. So you'll think that there is no God, and therefore you're in control of the situation. We'll see how you do with that. And as soon as we say, well, no, I'm not in control, then the facade is lifted. And then suddenly you see God present. You see how things are supposed to work out. Again, it doesn't mean that it's going to work out exactly the way you want, but it is working out the way God wants. And there's purpose in that. And there's meaning in that. And you show up in the pain and in the discomfort, and you do what you need to do.
I was something, I feel like maybe something that's missing is how, yes, God's in control of everything, but also I feel like for me, letting go and having this awareness, like I have to appreciate my own humanity in this whole process as well. And I learned here in a JLI class that God gave humans free will. So we do have some kind of responsibility, and we do have to kind of honor our own humanity as creations of God. And in that, we do have a kind of duty to understand ourselves emotionally, intellectually, and all this. And I like, so as much as you're having a spiritual experience, there's also this kind of awareness of what's happening in your body. And I don't know, my therapist has helped me with that, which might be a controversial thing to say because some people don't really like therapy as much as they like the program. And also I had to learn from my therapist that substances are morally neutral, which is something we've said here. And it's really about like the way I'm judging things and the way I'm trying to control things, but also I have to understand and just like let myself go through the process as a human with limitations.
Powerful what you just said. And I think that they do have to work hand in hand, therapy and the program. But I think what you just said is really a big part of step 4, right? I think all too often people see step 4 as, where did I screw up? And part of the fearless moral inventory is also saying, what are my strengths? Where's my humanity here? Right? It's not ignoring those strengths and weaknesses, right? It's just not becoming a victim to them. So I think a certain way, I feel a certain way. I did grow up with certain circumstances that affected me a certain way. That's a reality. And that helps formulate and create the challenge. My father's statement to me wasn't ignore what you're experiencing. He was giving me a foundation. The foundation of your healing is to recognize that God is the orchestrator of everything. And then my weaknesses and my strengths become part of that equation. Then there's somebody said this at the symposium. I think it was Smitty. He said that he always, saw his awkwardness as a brokenness instead of, or like Rabbi Taub likes to say, it's not a bug, it's a feature, right? It's not our weaknesses of character, our weaknesses of genetics, our weaknesses of upbringing. In other words, wherever those things show up that create challenge in our lives, they're not brokenness, they're features. They're unique features that make up the complexity of who we are. And that entirety gives us our purpose on this earth. There's nothing that's a mistake. There's nothing that's a byproduct. It's all perfectly designed for us to fulfill our unique purpose on this earth. So some of it shows up as strengths, and some of it shows up as weaknesses. Some of it shows up as positive decisions that we've made in our lives, and some of it shows up as really bad decisions that we made up in our lives. But it's the complexity of all that brings us to this moment. And this is the moment. This is the moment, as will be the next one and the one after that. But this is the moment that all of that was a preparation for. How do I know that? Because I wouldn't be here otherwise. If I screwed up so badly that I wasn't supposed to be here anymore, I wouldn't be here. And if everything that has happened until now wasn't designed for this moment wouldn't be. So I'm here in this moment with all of the complexity of what makes me, what makes my environment, what makes the decision in front of me. That's all divinely orchestrated to bring me to this moment. And now I have a decision to make. And we do that endless number of times a day, and in the morning and in the evening, and facing each of our challenges and navigating that. All right, Bridget will reach out and we'll figure out when we'll do this again.
Every day.
Every day. Thank you, Bridget, for coordinating this.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. To be continued.